Hey, 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 what is going on, IK Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today I am back for a lot. Man, it has been a while since I've been able to have a minute to actually sit down and record some video juegos here in IK, and OM Jizzle Ali Bizzle, I am so excited to finally be back. Okay, we got a lot that we're going to cover today as gosh, I can't wait really for tomorrow, and today at Reset shortly, right, we're going to be finding out what the KvK map is going to be like for us entering it first, right, for those players that are in that KvK trial season. So we're going to touch a little bit about KvK expectations today. We're going to talk about a interesting interaction that happened on the KvK chat room on the official Infinity Kingdom Discord, and I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of server prep, expectations, as we mentioned, right, and some kind of just good practices and tips going into KvK, some things to look out for that I think is just going to be good, really just do's and possibly don'ts when it comes to how your server is going into KvK. So I'm hoping that this is going to be kind of like a nice introduction guide into your prep, along with giving a few nice kind of side examples. All right, before we get started, as always, make sure you guys like, of course, make sure to ring that notification bell, and if you want to be a part of our conversation, you can join our Discord. It'll be in the pinned comment or, of course, the description down below. All right, so today, we're actually doing, and probably should have done this a little bit earlier, but thankfully we're doing a little bit of like last-minute city redistribution here in 79. I think this is arguably the last, if not one of the last, cities that we are doing for our top 8, and I'll just kind of briefly show this, right? So again, the way that we're doing our kind of distribution of cities and buffs is possibly maybe a little different than how some of the other servers are doing them, right? Bear in mind, as always, this is just one way to do it. For most of you that know in 79, right, we have an arguable pure balancing. And I know I haven't done an update on the rankings as of recent, but I'm going to be honest, it looks sexy, fam. Like, it's very desirable when it comes to everything that I had always been hoping to build a server on when we started out in S6 with one alliance, when we ended up going to S8, right, with the group that I put together and built there to establish an S8. And then when we eventually did the same thing for S36. So it's nice to see kind of the efforts coming finally to fruition, because you could see here when you look 1 through 6, right, it's, you know, an 8 mil gap. But again, really close, right? And eventually 6 is going to get close to 5, and when that happens, right, it'll be at about a 4.3, 4.2 mil gap, depending. Along with that, right, bringing up, of course, our number 7 and our number 8, right, to try and have us at a solid 8, and eventually working with our third green shell, which is one of our many shells across our factions, right, to kind of bring that up so we can have a nice top 3 all around, with hopes of focusing on a top 12, right, top 4 for each faction. But you can just see the power distribution here looks great when it comes to the alliances, and this has always been the hope, right, when it comes to us balancing power that we always preach on. And, you know, sometimes patience, like they say, is a virtue, right? You just got to kind of give it a little bit of time to marinate. And so with the city distributions, right, for those of you who might not be necessarily 100% familiar with how we do our things here in 79, right, we go off of RSS zones. So that's why we don't necessarily have that kind of 1/3 pretty map. And the reason why, as that I've talked about in other videos, is because you never know who's going to be your top alliances, right? If you're looking at like a top 15 and you have 9 alliances within the top 15, one faction, and you have, you know, 3 in another and 5 in another, and you do a 1/3 split, right, you're having to distribute a third of the territory between 9 alliances in a faction, or 5 alliances, or 3 alliances in a faction, right? So it becomes a little more difficult unless you have specifically even numbers that you're working on. Instead, the way we like to do it is we go off of our RSS zones when we split. So as an example, right, to look at 1, you look at RSS zone 4, you got 4 cities there, along with having 9 capitals, right? So the just 2 examples is that for RSS zone 4, right, we make sure that each alliance has 1 of these, right? So that means to be 1 per. And that allows for 9 alliances up to 150 players per alliance, right, to farm for these, which is about 1,350 players. And then we also distribute capitals evenly, so each alliance gets 1. And again, right, it's one of the things where, remember, it's a give and take, right? If you're in a server where 1 or 2 or 3 alliances have arguably all the cities, yeah, they're going to be getting more buffs from those. But at the same time, right, they may not have as many active alliances that are still playing there comparably to what you would probably see when you look at 79, right? And then vice versa as well. In this server, we're not necessarily going to have one alliance that has a bunch of cities or max city level along with vast territory from your alliance technology, right? So it's a little bit more of a balance, kind of an all-rounder, if you will. And then, again, depending on the server you're in, maybe you have 1 or 2 alliances that have everything, right? And anything in between. So just some things to keep in mind. I just wanted to kind of briefly start out that because, again, it is related to KvK. One of the things I wanted to touch on, though, before we really get into a little bit deeper on the KvK prep was something that was happening on the IK Discord that I wanted to show here briefly because I thought it was just a really good interaction. And everyone here is, well, again, I don't want to say like it's all in good fun because everyone here is really cool, right? And there's nothing like bad to say about anyone, but I just thought the conversation and the discussion here was pretty funny, but in a really good way. Because a lot of these guys I've talked to, I know most of them, at least through DMs and through some subtle conversations. But I saw this post from Ruli. Shout out to Ruli. He's like, I can't wait to see which KvK groups come up with KvK rules like no tile hitting. And, some other things like, there won't be any action the first few days, KvK farming event mostly anyways. And then it was just interesting because then, my comment, as I was scrolling through some of these, eventually when I had some time to sit down, I said, oh, rolling on floor laughing, that is just going too far. And then he says here in this comment, he's like, I know for a fact Care Bear servers will be like, let's keep it competitive, but clean, no tile hitting, no hitting castles, level 3 levels or more below, etc. Right? Sorry, I had to do that in my Care Bear voice, if there was even one. Gosh, I wish I knew the motto or like what they would say there at the end before they shot the lovely hearts out of their bellies. Or I should say images in this case. And so I gave him the Care Bear gift. But what I thought was interesting was what had happened afterwards, right? So you see some of the comments here where he says, he's like, LMFAO, well, if you're saying that's too far, then I believe you. You're like the king of server rules. I'm pretty sure every server's rules are because of whether they whether they realize it or not. And so I was thinking about this for a minute, and I thought to myself, you know what? I think a part of it is true, and that's not necessarily a dawn or a kind of a tipping of the hat for me, but more so of kind of what I explain later that we'll get into in a moment. And so I responded and I told Ruli, I said, more like the king of server management on ways to best prepare for KvK success, but hey, I'll take it. And this is kind of where it gets in, right? And I just thought this was an interesting perspective and viewpoint from a few other people that had commented after he did, where he says, I say king of rules. I remember watching BN videos when I first started in S9, sending them to my server leaders. And again, he's saying like people would send the videos to his server. Leaders saying, we need to do this, make a council and rules, etc. Then I grew to despise it all. Now I am the anti-hero, right? So shout out to Ruli. And so... he's like, turning my servers into mini UN, Silas says, is unfun for me. And so he's like, it's not a bad way to play. He's like, I'm not bashing, just wanted to give credit that I even followed, even I followed his formula, but it's just not for everyone. He says it makes servers more stable for longer, in my opinion. I tend to agree. He says, yeah, if we have kept that philosophy in S9, it would have been a different server today. I can't say it would be better, but different. Better to some. I killed him before destroying Appetite. I love it. And so then I go into this thing here, which I think is very important when it comes to if you're someone who's played Kingdom Builders before, on how the environment within the kingdom builder you're playing can be shaped early on in a game's life with the influence of creators, right, and of public figures, right? Now, a public figure could be someone that could be a creator. It could be someone who's very active on the official Discord. Maybe they kind of gain some traction for helping out a lot of people. Maybe they're kind of like more outspoken about ideas and ways to go about playing the game. And then maybe some people just kind of look up to them, right? So there's a few different ways that can kind of go. But I said, it's funny because I slightly believe this, partly because a portion of servers are and can be influenced early on in games life by content creators, public figures. I mentioned when I played Rock, right, no creators ever talked about server management as a normal part of their content catalog and what they would put out. It was one-offs here and there, but barely anything, if nothing. I said part of this is because they themselves have not managed Kingdoms fully, from jump group prep all the way to KvK success, and then have done it more than once. This is just one part of it, of course, but it's hard to talk about something in which most, if not many, just do not have a confident amount of knowledge and experience. And I think this is very accurate, because if you look, and I've done a video on this on my channel as well before, where we did a deep dive into the top 3 most watched Kingdom Builder content creators for games like Rise of Kingdoms, State of Survival, Lords Mobile, and we talked about, we went through like their last 3 months of videos that they put out. I think it was last 2 or 3 months of videos they put out, and there wasn't even one video at the time that we looked at where it talked about managing a server, managing a kingdom. What are all the different areas, right? Or even just touching on any of the different areas that go into that. And I think that even though I've seen some of these creators put off like these one-off videos here and there, nothing consistent. Most of what we're usually seeing from Kingdom Builder content creators is, you know, progression-based content, event information, right, like patch notes, general updates, things like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that is a very small part of the game, in my opinion. Right? Managing a server and understanding how you generate a lot of activity, and therefore, by the byproduct of that, player retention is always going to be the most important thing. Right? And this is directly involved into KvK, because people need to understand that when you're going into KvK, and here, you know, we'll come back for a minute, right? When you go into KvK, you are essentially needing to have more active players than the other players. Right, and that's one of the main things, right? It's something that you'll hear often from like veteran kingdom builders, right? They'll tell you activity beats power, right? And I wholeheartedly agree with this, right? Power is always going to have limitations. It doesn't matter if you're the strongest guy, especially. And I wanna be very clear with this, is that in more respects to Infinity Kingdom and the system that they've put in place, where it limits not only the amount of troops that you have, but it limits the amount of action point usage and therefore attacks that you can do per day. After you use all your AP, right? After you've drained it, you've bought the extra AP. I believe it's from Green Gems, and then you've drained that. You're done. You cannot attack anyone else. So Infinity Kingdom, in my opinion, has really created more of a team dynamic and really like the team sport in its essence, where you really need more activity than power. In something like Rise of Kingdoms, and I'm sure a few other kingdom builders, you could probably make the argument that power is right up there with activity, if not maybe exceeding a little bit, because you can do unlimited attacks and you could have however many troops you want stored up, right? But in Infinity Kingdom, I really believe that, you know, there is not really going to be an I in team, but I also believe that everyone is going to have a role. Right, you're going to have rally leads, you're going to have garrison captains for defending, you're going to have players that can fill those rallies, you're going to have people that can just go off and do the one-off pickings for players they're able to win against, right, hive hitting, counter hive hitting, sieging, counter sieging. I mean, all these things are going to benefit servers that have more average general activity, again, in my opinion, versus just having a few strong players, right, that are just so much stronger and a cut above the rest, right, if it's one or however many. With that being said, right, before we get into a few more kind of tips and expectations, right, let's go back. I just kind of want to finish this thing. So then after I posted that, really said, it's true. All the early servers watch your videos and we all strive to be like S8. So for some of you that don't know, right, the group that I put together, which I want to say we had about 8, I want to say it's about 8 alliances, plus or minus 1, that we had going into S8, right? And this was a jumper group that I had put together for the project there, right? So, you know, I interviewed all the leads, I interviewed officers, whether that was with 1 or 2 interview processes, and then right, we put together a management team. I did pretty much 99% of all the recruiting for the group, and then right, I laid out the game plan, our policies, what our goals were, right, and people that joined that group was because they wanted to be a part of that. Right, they wanted to join and be involved in what that project was going to be and right, what it stood for. And I think that that's always the hope that you want when you're doing a group or a project, is that you are hoping that players are going to join based on right what you're putting out there, right? That they're coming to you over another group because they believe in what you're doing. And now we kind of get to a fast forward point, and S8 was probably at one point the most promoted server in the game, right? Largely in part because of my own YouTube efforts. Again, just because I was one of the few creators there, right? So it's kind of almost by default, so to speak. And then also because of the people that I was talking to, other relationships that I had built with other players and other servers, right? Along with some of our leads and officers and other players that had friends of friends, right? Word of mouth, right? It was really overall encompassing of a collaborative effort, right, when it comes to promoting the server that we're in, people to come over. So a large chunk of the initial base that came over after migration opened, right, was a big reason because of the promoting efforts that I did, not only on YouTube, but off YouTube as well, and then from the other individuals, right, that participated in helping to contribute and obviously promote as well. So that was one of the reasons why, even though I had later left S8, S8 had got such a big boost to people coming up, and it was widely considered, to be the flagship server in the game, right? That was what I wanted to promote the server as much as the people that were a part of it. And so, just to kind of give a little backstory there. Then Ruli says, then all the following servers followed the older servers. Without your vids, I would have destroyed S9 the first week. Which is funny at the same time. Thank you, Whale, Mosh, and Ruli. And then I had mentioned... here he says, Ruli says, it's true. All right, he kind of commented at his own where he says, it's true, all the early servers watch your videos. We all kind of strive to be like S8. He's like, anyone who denies that is capping. I don't know what capping is. I feel like I'm not in the know with some of the younger lingo, possibly. Or maybe I just haven't heard this one yet. I'll have to Google maybe my Urban Dictionary. Anyway, so then Sono's like, eh. And then Ruli's like, bruh, S16, don't cap. Please don't cap. Y'all were like the best copy of S8. And then he's like, bro, I don't want to play them. We're only too close server. He's like, now you do. And I think Aquino said something like, he's like, isn't it great in the end to see very different approaches? Would be kind of boring if every server does the same thing. And I think that's true. I think that's one of the great reasons why in Kingdom Builders, right, we have a lot of different approaches, which is pretty fantastic. And then I think I commented here a little bit lower where I said, Aquino said something like, one day we all might need to unite against Korea server. I think he meant Korean server. And then my response was, if only you knew how far ahead BN, talking about myself in the third person, actually has thought about and planned for before even touching IK, it might surprise you. He's like, his plan for the future is to come to, oh, woo! I'm sure. And then I think my last one here was me kind of responding saying, right, like, you think I was building S8 just to fight against NAEU. I said, with respect, Asia servers are usually where the bigger, more intense battles are, in my experience. This was true in Rock, and I'm sure in other Kingdom Builders. And then Kingdom was like, definitely. And this is something that I think is really important, is that, when people play in the servers that I'm a part of, right, or if I'm managing and building, there's a lot of thought. One of the things I often tell people is, sometimes you got to be like Bobby Fischer. Right, you got to be like, or for some of the new folks, right, you got to be like Magnus Carlsen, right, you really have to kind of think 20, 30 moves ahead, sometimes even more than that, and it can't just be about, right, and this goes for anyone, right, if you have just a general game plan for your server, it doesn't matter what it is good to think long-term and later down the road on how you're going to implement some of these steps. And so, again, one of the reasons to try and build and have a flagship server on the NAEU side, right, which is arguably kind of server S1 through S92, right, because at S93, that's when you start getting the Asian influx, right, in some of that regions, or in some of those regions, excuse me. And so I think it's important to try and have a flagship server, but even if you have a few or however many strong servers, that's great as well, right? I think for me, myself personally, the hope was to try and build somewhat of a flagship server. And now I think that's kind of where we're getting at now in 79, with just how much influx has come. I mean, I think we're at 450 minimum, if not maybe 500 players that have already migrated to 79. So it's really awesome to see, and my hat is off. It almost makes me shed some tears because of how important it is for those of you who've heard me mention, right, for how long I've been working to build a server that I can really call my own, along with the people here that are a part of what we as a collective are building. It is amazing. But again, just for myself personally, it is so overwhelming to see the amount of interest and the appreciation, right, for what we're doing in 79. Now, let me kind of lastly follow up with, right, what are some expectations and some things that players are going to want to kind of keep note of? So, and these are just kind of good practices that I can give you kind of on a broad overview, which is that right? Keep in mind, one realistic expectation to have is that it is good to reach out to other servers to potentially talk about, I don't necessarily want to say allying, but what I will say is it's good to at least make an introduction. When you are going through and doing diplomacy for KvK, this is something that I can guarantee you other servers have already been doing. I know this because we've already been doing it. And these are things that, you start off by reaching out to other servers, kind of asking them, hey, who's your KvK rep? Or is there someone who's representing your server as a whole in KvK, kind of doing your KvK diplomacy, right? And even if you're just making an introduction, you're trying to see where they're at, they're seeing where you're at, right? That's just how you build good relationships, and then over time you can build a rapport, right, with people. Google rapport if you don't know what it means. And so it's good to do these things as early as possible, because at the end of the day, don't be surprised if you don't do any KvK diplomacy and you are essentially going in thinking or hoping that it's just going to be some kind of Hunger Games Battle Royale free-for-all, and then all of a sudden you're getting ganged on by 2 or 3 servers. Because trust me when I say anything can happen. It could turn into a 1v7, it could turn into a 2v6, 3v5, 4v4, and anything in between, right? You could have 3 unified groups, 1 of 3, 1 of 3, 1 of 2, right? I mean, you could have 4 groups of 2. I mean, it's wild, all the different types of combinations that you can have going into KvK, which is also one of the reasons why it makes it so fun to do and to be a part of. So again, that would probably be my one of my first big tips there, is just go in with realistic expectations that anything can happen, could happen, may happen, or will happen. And then 2, right, do some early reach out for KvK diplomacy. Number 3, right, this is going to be harder for some servers, but I'm going to just be brutally honest here, is that it is going to be really, really important to make sure that you, as a server, are going in to KvK in a somewhat, if not as much as, unified capacity. And what I really mean by that is that even if you're fighting, even if you guys are, all doing your own thing, try and at least come together for KvK, right? If you did nothing else, try to come together for KvK. Trust me when I say you will thank me later. If you're in a server that's just war-torn, I am sorry, but I still will say this and still advise, even if you're someone who is, right, if you're any of the participants that are in a server and you're doing nothing but just fighting each other, trust me when I say put that on hold, put it on hold, and you may find that you are able to reestablish and to come together through the fire and build a bond, build a relationship, because you participated and engaged and supported each other. Even if you only viewed it initially as temporarily, that could build into something. And even if it doesn't, at least you were able to come together and not just get your server completely rickrolled. And I'm going to say this is probably, and here's my 4th point, is that, and this will be my last one, because I want to try and keep the video at least semi-shorter, even though we're already 22 minutes plus. 4th point is going to be, right, remember this, and I will touch on this later in a more detailed video, is that depending on how your server performs in KvK will also play a huge factor and be a direct result on you being able to promote your server, thereby getting more players to migrate there, or if you do not perform well, it could be the cause of more players leaving, therefore rendering your server more inactive. And if it keeps happening, and depending on how bad it happens the first time, and then for any other times after that, could eventually leave your server dead. And so I just want to kind of heed that, because I cannot tell you how many servers and kingdoms I've seen this happen. I'm sure with many of you out there who've played other kingdom builders, that if you've been through multiple KvKs, if you've gone to a server because they won KvK, if you left a server because they lost, this is something that everyone is going to experience, right? And because if you're new and you've never experienced a KvK or an SVS before in these types of games, please just go in with this understanding that these things can happen. And so if that doesn't motivate servers to try and come together, and even if it's on a temporary kind of nap, right, non-aggression pact basis, trust me when I say it's going to be a lot better than it will be if you don't, right? Unless your server's kind of already on that downward spiral and you're already planning to leave anyways, then I I can't say good for you because that's not the way to end that, but you know where it's going at that point. With all of that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this brief introduction, if you will, into KvK. Some nice kind of side story points here, and I would love to hear your comments down below, right, on anything that I talked about, whether it's the KvK stuff, whether it's the Discord post stuff. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you, as always. That's it for me. I'm out. Until next time, we'll catch y'all later.